Okay, so what if everything you thought you knew about attraction was, well, only half the story? Today, we are diving deep into a source called The Architecture of Attraction. And what's fascinating is it lays out two totally different blueprints for creating that kind of magnetic presence. One is like building a fortress, right? It's all about defense, getting ready for a battlefield. And the other? It's more like building a temple, something from the inside out. So the big question is, which one actually holds up? And that really brings us to the central question this whole thing forces us to grapple with. It basically frames the entire debate. Is attraction a battlefield you've got to win? A strategic game of power where you're constantly defending yourself? Or is it just a state of being you cultivate? Something that just radiates out of you because of who you are on the inside? The text goes into both, and believe me, we are going to break down every single angle. All right, so here's the plan for today. First, we'll lay out the two big philosophies. Then, we're going to dive right into viewpoint one, the whole emotional battlefield idea. After that, we'll switch gears completely to viewpoint two, the inner architecture and its Jungian toolkit. We'll see how they both kind of point to one core principle, which is emotional sovereignty, and then we'll wrap it all up. Sound good? Let's go. So right off the bat, the first thing you have to understand about this source material is that it's not handing you some simple, easy answer. Not at all. It's actually presenting a major conflict, like a huge fork in the road for how you even think about attraction. It lays out these two competing ideas for what creates that undeniable presence, and they are worlds apart. I mean, different approaches, different motivations, different end goals, completely different.
All right, let's get into the first philosophy. And I gotta say, this one it's definitely the most provocative. This viewpoint basically frames attraction as a conflict zone, a game of power where emotional control is everything. It's your weapon, it's your shield. The whole worldview here is that relationships, especially romantic ones, are kind of transactional and just filled with these subtle power plays. And just so we're all on the same page here, for this section, I'm just going to be explaining the direct ideas and the exact language the source uses, okay? We're just exploring what's there.
Okay, so this quote really just cuts right to the chase, doesn't it? It's the raw, unfiltered premise of this whole first viewpoint. The text argues that, through social dynamics and maybe even evolution, women have become masters of this subtle emotional battlefield. Now, it's not framing this as some conscious evil plan. It's presented more as a deeply ingrained, almost instinctive way of navigating the world and securing safety. And the core warning here is pretty stark. If you're a man who is just completely unaware of these undercurrents, you're playing the game at a massive disadvantage. You're vulnerable.
So to really get this viewpoint, we have to look at this term simp, but exactly as the text defines it. Because in this context, it's not just about being a nice guy. It's a very specific psychological profile. It describes a man who has essentially outsourced his entire sense of self-worth to a woman's approval. He puts women on this pedestal, seeing them not as people, but as gatekeepers to his own happiness. And according to the text, that mindset is what makes him the perfect target for manipulation, because that desperate need for a thumbs up can be used to pull his strings.
So okay, how does this alleged manipulation actually work? Well, the source lays out what it calls a toolkit of emotional weapons. Let's run through them. Guilt, for example, that might be used to make a man feel like he's totally responsible for her happiness, so he's always scrambling to fix things. Shame could be used to punish him for doing something she doesn't like. Then you have desire, validation, and affection. They're framed almost like currency, right? You get them as a reward for good behavior and they're taken away as punishment. Even things like tears and silence are presented as strategic tools. Tears can bypass logic and get sympathy, while silence can be this passive-aggressive way of taking control, making the other person desperate to fix whatever's wrong.
Now, after laying out this pretty intense adversarial framework, the text offers its solution. And it's really important to get this part. The solution isn't to fight back with the same weapons. It's not about resentment. It's all about strengthening yourself. The argument is that the best defense against being controlled is to become, uncontrollable. To build such a rock-solid internal frame that those emotional games just don't work on you. This means discipline, firm boundaries, and having your own purpose that's so strong, no one person can throw you off course. The goal isn't to be aggressive. It's to command respect by showing you can't be played.
And then the text does a complete 180. It's a hard pivot. Seriously, it's like we're closing one book and opening up a completely different one. Everything we've just talked about, get ready for the polar opposite. The focus is about to shift entirely, from the battlefield outside to the landscape within.
So, welcome to viewpoint 2, the inner architecture. This is a whole different world. In this view, attraction isn't a prize you win, it's just a reflection of who you are.
This perspective is really rooted in the psychology of Carl Jung, and it argues that real, lasting magnetism, it isn't a performance and it's definitely not a defense mechanism. It's just an effortless side effect of doing the deep, sometimes really hard, internal work to become psychologically whole. And this quote from Carl Jung, this is the absolute cornerstone of this second viewpoint. The whole idea hangs on this, that there are these huge, powerful parts of our own minds that we're just not aware of. And these unconscious forces, they're actually running the show. They're dictating who we're attracted to, our weird compulsions, our deepest fears, all of it. And if we don't do the work to bring them into the light, well, we're just along for the ride, calling our programming fate.
So what exactly is this unconscious territory? Well, Jung called the biggest part of it the shadow. And it is so important to understand this concept correctly. The shadow isn't just your dark side or all the bad stuff. Think of it more like a psychological storage locker for everything you've ever pushed away about yourself so that you could fit in or feel loved. Yes, that includes things like anger or jealousy. But, and this is key, it also holds your greatest positive potential. Your creativity, your ambition, your passion. Basically, any part of you that your conscious mind, your ego, decided was just too much or not acceptable for your public image.
Here's a great way to think about it. Your conscious ego, that's your polished LinkedIn profile. It's the highlight reel you show the world. The unconscious shadow, though, that's all the raw footage. It's all the stuff that got left on the cutting room floor. It's got the awkward takes and the messy impulses, but it also has moments of pure genius and hidden potential. So while your ego is what you think you know about yourself, the shadow is often the one silently steering the ship, especially when you're on autopilot. Okay, so how does this shadow mess with our love lives? Well, according to the source, one of the main ways is something called projection. This is when your unconscious mind basically sees its own lost parts in somebody else, and you become insanely attracted to them. For example, a super serious, buttoned-up person might find themselves completely obsessed with someone who is wild and spontaneous. It feels like love at first sight, like destiny. But in this Jungian framework, it's really just your own psyche screaming, hey, I want that part of me back. This creates this incredibly intense but ultimately fragile attraction because you're falling for a fantasy, an ideal, not the actual person. Okay, I know what you're thinking. This theory is fascinating, but how in the world do you actually do any of this? It sounds so abstract, right? Well, the good news is the source doesn't just leave us hanging with theory. It gives us a practical Jungian toolkit, a set of real, actionable steps to start making that unconscious stuff conscious. So let's see how it actually works.
This is really where the rubber meets the road. The source breaks down shadow work into 4 main practices. First, you identify. This means paying close attention to the things in other people that make you irrationally angry or judgmental. That strong emotional reaction, it's often a giant neon sign pointing directly at something you've disowned in yourself. Second, you inquire. Use tools like journaling to dig into where those feelings come from without judging yourself. Third, you express. You find nonverbal ways to let this stuff out. Through art, music, working out, anything that lets the subconscious speak. And finally, maybe the most crucial step, accept. You have to approach this whole process with self-compassion. The goal here isn't to destroy your shadow, it's to integrate it.
And this model is a perfect illustration of what happens when that shadow is ignored. It's called the emotional cascade model, and it's a chain reaction. It all starts with a trigger. Let's say your partner says something that hurts your feelings. But instead of acknowledging it, you go to step 2, suppression. You just push it down, pretend it's no big deal. That leads to rumination, where you just replay their words over and over in your head. The pressure builds and builds until you hit overwhelm. And finally, that leads to a compulsion. You pick a massive fight about something totally unrelated, like the laundry, just to blow off all that steam. That's your shadow acting out because you refuse to listen to it consciously.
So what's the way out of that self-sabotaging cascade? Well, the text points to authenticity, but it defines it in a very specific psychological way. This isn't just about being quirky or speaking your mind. It's a state of deep inner alignment, where your actions on the outside actually match your core values on the inside. And according to the source, this is built on a few key pillars: knowing yourself, being able to process things without your ego getting in the way, and then behaving in a way that's consistent with who you truly are.
And this leads us right into emotional intelligence, or EQ, which the text presents as an absolutely critical skill. You can see how these 4 pieces build on each other, like a pyramid. It all has to start with self-awareness. I mean, you can't manage what you don't even know is there, right? Once you have that, you can move to self-management, which is about controlling your impulses and reactions. And when you can manage yourself, you develop real social awareness.
the empathy to actually understand what's going on with other people. And all of that comes together to allow for relationship management, which is the art of building those deep, real, authentic connections.
Okay, pay attention to this slide because this might be one of the single most important distinctions the text makes. It argues that yes, vulnerability is incredibly attractive, but only when it comes from a place of strength. See, vulnerability from weakness just comes across as neediness. It's like an empty cup begging someone else to fill it up with validation. But vulnerability from strength, that comes from a person who is already whole and secure in themselves. It's a sign of courage. It's not a plea for help. It's an invitation to connect. It's a full cup offering to share. And that, according to this source, makes all the difference in the world.
So, here we are. We've walked through two totally different blueprints for attraction. One is a fortress, built to defend against an emotional battlefield. The other is an inner temple, built through deep psychological work. And yet, for all their differences, they both point toward one single unifying principle, what the text calls emotional sovereignty. Basically, mastering your own emotional state.
And it all boils down to this. This slide is the absolute core of this entire breakdown. It's not about what you're doing, it's about why you're doing it. Both philosophies say yes, you must master your emotions, but their reasons for doing so could not be more different. Viewpoint 1 says you do it for defense. You build a shield. You learn to win the power game so you don't get manipulated. Viewpoint 2 says you do it for wholeness. You do it to integrate all the parts of yourself, to connect authentically, and to become a complete human being. One is about not losing the game, the other is about not needing to play the game at all. So, as we wrap this all up, it's clear the source text, The Architecture of Attraction, doesn't give us one simple answer. It gives us a choice. It presents two distinct blueprints. The first is that external architecture of defense. You build your walls, you learn the rules of combat. The second is an internal architecture of being. You cultivate a foundation of wholeness, and from that, a magnetic presence just naturally emerges.
And all of that leaves us with one final big question to think about. After looking at both of these paths, you have to wonder, is that magnetic presence we're all drawn to a shield that you build, piece by piece, to protect yourself from the world? Or is it a space you create from within? A space where you, and maybe others, can finally feel whole? The text lays out both arguments, and the path you choose, well, that says everything.